Okay, so this is the kind of question that you would get in English Literature Paper 2. On this paper you're being assessed on both Romeo and Juliet, your Shakespeare text, and Frankenstein, your 19th century novel. Romeo and Juliet is section A and Frankenstein is section B. There will be other questions in the paper, so you do need to turn to the appropriate ones. But once you've found the Frankenstein question, this is the method for this kind of question. Now, the entire paper is an hour and 45 minutes, which leaves you approximately 50 minutes for this kind of question. And so that's something to bear in mind right from the beginning. You've got 50 minutes. So I would always spend approximately 5 minutes reading and planning and 45 minutes writing up your answer. Okay? And so the first thing to do is to place the extracts. Now, this is an example that I have made, so it doesn't give us the exact chapter reference. Okay? However, normally it will tell you which chapter it's from and what's happening in this chapter, so that you can place what's happened before and what's happened after. So this is the extract and it's from chapter 2. Okay? So I'll just put chapter 2 there so that you can see it, but normally that would be there. So this is from chapter 2 and it says, read the following extract and answer the question that follows. In this extract, Victor talks about his inspiration to explore science and his thirst for knowledge as a young man. So it's about his inspiration to explore science and his thirst for knowledge as a young man. So we know that this is about Victor's youth. That's the most important thing at the beginning. And because we know it's Victor's youth, we can talk about what happened before this and what's still to come yet in the novel. So before, we've already had Walton's letters to his sister. We've already had the allegorical warning of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the warning about I shall kill no albatross. And we've had Victor's warning to Walton not to pursue science in the way that he has. We've also learnt a lot about Victor's idyllic childhood, about Elizabeth, about Clerval, about all these people who are important to him. And so this is the point at which Victor's inspiration is first growing. Okay, so after this point, we've got lots of key events also, so we can talk about after this event. We've got the creature is made. We've got Victor regrets this and he abandons his creature. We've got the associated madness. We've got the creature's infancy in the forest. We've got the creature confronting Victor. We've got the death of the family members. We've even got the death of Victor himself back in the Arctic. So that's just a very, very quick, potted history of the events in the novel. It's not every detail, but it just allows you to very quickly say, okay, here is about where I am. The next thing I do before I even start to annotate at all is I go to the bottom here and I have a look at the question itself, and the question is always phrased in the exact same way, starting with this extract. So starting with it, not using it entirely, but starting with it, write about how Shelley presents knowledge and discovery. Okay, so those are my key words. And if I ever see the word how, we're talking about language. Remember, it only says starting with the extract, so I need some quotes from the extract. And also elsewhere. And these are your gold quotes, the ones that you will have learned. If it's asking you to write about how Shelley presents it, we're talking about language and structure. So you might be talking about metaphors, semantic fields, you might be talking about hellish imagery, you might be talking about allusions, you might be talking about juxtaposition and binary oppositions of light and darkness and things like that. But my keywords are knowledge and discovery. Okay, so when I read, I'm looking for quotes to do with knowledge and discovery, and to remind you of that, in the bullet points it says how, again, so language and structure, Shelley presents knowledge and discovery in the extract, and how Shelley presents knowledge and discovery in the novel as a whole. And that's how I know I need quotes from elsewhere. The novel as a whole and the extract. And so this is how I plan that. So I keep in my head that the ideas that I'm thinking about here are knowledge and discovery. So as I'm reading through, I highlight any Swiss Army quotes, so quotes that have lots of language and structure features in them that I'm spotting in the text that are to do with knowledge and discovery. Okay, so as we do this, I'm just going to read through and I'm going to highlight the parts that I think would definitely relate to that idea of knowledge and discovery that I could talk about. And then I'm going to select my best quotations. Okay. My father was not scientific and I was left to struggle with a child's blindness, added to a student's thirst for knowledge. So we've got that metaphor there about the thirst for knowledge. So straight away I'm thinking that's a great one for knowledge and discovery. Under the guidance of my new preceptors, I entered with the greatest diligence into the search of the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. So the elixir of life, the search of the philosopher's stone, but the latter soon obtained my undivided attention. So Victor there is saying that his big obsession becomes the elixir of life. So that's the key point about his knowledge. Wealth was an inferior object, but what glory would attend the discovery if I could banish disease from the human frame and render man invulnerable to any but a violent death. So that's definitely about Victor's knowledge, about his egotism, about his control, about his desire to be the best and to gain notoriety. Nor were these my only visions. The raising of ghosts or devils was a promise liberally accorded by my favourite authors. So Victor wants to raise ghosts and devils. The fulfilment of which I most eagerly sought, and if my incantations were always unsuccessful, I attributed the failure rather to my own experience and mistake than to a want of skill or fidelity in my instructors. And thus, for a time, I was occupied by exploded systems, mingling like an unadept, 1,000 contradictory theories, and floundering desperately in a very slough of multifarious knowledge, guided by an ardent imagination and childish reasoning. So he talks about his ardent imagination, his childish reasoning, at the point that he is mingling like an adept through 1,000 contradictory theories. At this point, his understanding isn't as developed as he would like it to be. Till an accident again changed the current of my ideas. When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Belrive, when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. So here Victor's talking about the Sublime, so I'm going to select these quotations too. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and the thunder burst at once with a frightful loudness from the various quarters of the heavens. I remained, while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. Again, that element of the sublime. It's frightful, it's loud, but it creates curiosity and delight in Victor. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old beautiful oak which stood about 20 yards from our house, and so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. Okay, right, so those are the quotations that I've selected. So I now need to think about which gold quotations, or quotations from elsewhere in the novel, I could relate to some of these ideas. Quotations about knowledge and discovery. And so beneath here, I would be making my plan, but first of all, I need to choose my 3 quotations. Okay, so the first one I'm going to take is the thirst for knowledge, because I know I've got masses to say about that. That's one of my gold quotations, and that's going to be one. So Victor describes his thirst for knowledge as being like a thirst. I'm also going to take the idea of the elixir of life, and the idea that Victor could banish disease from the human frame, because both of those show Victor assuming the role of a deity. So I'm going to link those together and I'm going to talk to those together. And then I'm also going to talk about this one here, where we've got this idea of the sublime, Victor's inspiration being nature, and that being his knowledge and discovery in early life. But what I now need to do is I need to make links between these quotations and the other quotations from my knowledge, from my gold quotations, and of course you'll find those on your cue cards, and from your memory, of course, by the time we get to the exam. And I need to think, okay, which quotations would go really well with those ideas? Okay, so Victor's idea about a thirst for knowledge, he talks about it being a desire, talks about it being something that sustained him. It's almost this idea about fatalism. Okay, that he was fated. So I'm going to take the quotation, avert the storm that was even then hanging in the stars. And that's the quotation from elsewhere that I'm going to talk about. Because then I can talk about the idea of fatalism, the idea of him suggesting this was like a thirst, this was a desire he couldn't control. But actually, at the point at which he decided to explore his science, he could still have averted the things that occurred to him. He was driven on, however, he could have averted that crisis. And then I'm going to take these two ideas about him being like a god, like a deity. Okay? And for this one, I'm going to refer to the allegorical warning, the idea that I shall kill no albatross. Because in fact, that's what Walton says later on. Remember, the whole text is an allegorical warning against the dangers of playing God and manipulating science and assuming the role of deity, which is what Victor wants to do here. He wants to discover the elixir of life. He wants to banish disease from the human frame. He wants to render man invulnerable. He wants to assume the role of God. So by using that quotation, I can again relate to the allegorical warning and the romantic sentiment about the dangers of manipulating science. But then equally, when we look down here, we've got this direct reference to the Sublime. Victor's inspiration is the lightning strike. And again, we've got quotations like the thunder burst at once with a frightful loudness from the various quarters of the heavens, the celestial imagery of heavens, the juxtaposition between frightful loudness and curiosity and delight as words used together. Remember, we want judicious quotations, so small words would be even better. And so now I need to decide, again, what quotations that might link to. Ideas about the sublime, ideas about respect for nature, and here I'm going to relate, I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave. Because that's about Victor sinning against nature. Here he's showing a great respect and reverence for nature, but actually Victor doesn't respect nature. There's a violation of nature. There's an assault on nature as he dabbles in the unhallowed damps of the grave. The emotive adjective unhallowed, emphasising Victor's heresy, the idea that he's playing God, the idea that he's sinning against God. Okay, so now I've got my three quotations. I've got my three quotations from the text, and I've got my three from my brain. Now obviously that's taken me more than 5 minutes, but that's because I'm talking through it at the same time. And actually if it takes you more than 5 minutes, that's absolutely fine. 10 minutes is absolutely fine, because then you've still got a good 40 minutes to write a really clear 3-part essay. So now, if I was to write that essay, the next thing I'd have to do is this. Okay, so here is my blank exam paper. It's not dissimilar to what you'll have. You'll have an answer booklet and you'll write your question numbers in the margin here. But if the question is about knowledge and discovery, the first thing I want to do is to create an introduction. Now, you obviously don't need to write the title, introduction, but this is just so that you know what this would look like. So, you want to address the theme of knowledge and discovery. And I would use those words straight away. So I might say something like, knowledge and discovery is an essential theme within Frankenstein, within Shelley's Frankenstein, because. And there I might talk about the idea that Shelley was a romantic. Shelley wanted us to understand about the dangers of manipulating science. At the time in the 19th century, science was both fascinating and also a force to be worried about or scared of, and therefore it's a really important theme. Victor's knowledge is his fatal flaw. So those are the kind of ideas that I want to talk about here. And then when I introduce, I go through this process 3 times and I say, firstly, in the extract, Shelley uses, and I choose the device. So my device might be, uses metaphor, if it's thirst for knowledge, to show Victor's unstoppable desires to explore science from an early age. And so I make a clear point. And then I continue in the same way as I normally would do with a PQEL. There's my point. I'm then going to give my quote. I'm then going to explain what the quotation implies, infers, evokes, suggests, hyperbolizes,